Couple of things I wanted to go over before we really get to the matter is when you are pruning, safety in mind. Really good gloves will prevent a lot of injuries. I'm going to use these gloves today. I have a little bit more dexterity when I have ones that fit me better. And the other thing would be if you are pruning trees or shrubs, safety glasses, again, are a must. All right. As far as tools go, I'm not really going to go into all the different tools, but these are the only two tools that I personally use. This is a small saw, comes in much larger types. This I think is only 6-inch. The only disadvantage is that you can't sharpen it, so you have to occasionally replace the blade. And the other are hand pruners. Hand pruners, you ought to get the bypass pruners. If you open it up and look at it, there's really only one blade that is sharp. That's the one you're concerned with. You can sharpen it. It takes like 5 seconds to sharpen it. All right. So what do I want to cover today? First, I want to cover why would you prune in the first place? And next, I would like to go over just 4 vocabulary words that you have to understand to really be able to understand pruning. Then the 2 kinds of pruning cuts. The most important thing, how does a plant respond to each of those cuts? If you understand that, it's going to change how you prune forever. Then I would also like to cover when would you prune? And then I have a variety of other things that are kind of interwoven into the topics, but like how to prune something that has a caning habit to it, shrubs, not just shrubs, but hedges, things like that. We'll see how far we get. Don't forget, you can always put your questions into chat or use the help desk. All right, so why would you prune in the first place? I mean, Mother Nature made plants look the way they are. Why do we think we can do better than that? The Master Gardener answer is we prune to get light into the center of the plant and a better airflow throughout the plant. And I know you're sitting there thinking, well, that's really nice for Master Gardeners, but the truth is 90% of the pruning done by homeowners is for one reason. The plant is too big for the space that they have. They want the plant to get smaller. They want it to look really good, and they want it to be healthy. And if it happens to get more light and air, yeah, that's a good thing too. But that's a really tall order to get all of those things. We may not get all of them, but I think we can take steps toward getting closer to that goal. So let's look at these 4 vocabulary words. The first one is terminal bud. And there's a picture here, terminal bud. There's 2 in this picture. But if we take this, it's not a very big branch, came from a magnolia tree. There are many terminal buds. And on the entire tree, there's probably hundreds of terminal buds. The next term, oh, by the way, apical bud is the same as terminal bud for our purposes. but you'll hear apical a lot. So we go to number 3 is lateral bud, and lateral means side. So they're much smaller. They're along the side of the branch. So we have some little lateral buds here. The thing to keep in mind about a lateral bud is that you can't always see them. Lots of times they're latent, they're hidden, but they're there. And there can be hundreds of them that you can't see. I chose this because it's pretty obvious. You can easily tell where the lateral buds are. And that takes us down to the last word, which is auxin, A-U-X-I-N. Auxin's a hormone, a plant hormone. There are lots of kinds of auxin. We're only worried about one kind, and that is growth hormone. Auxin, the growth hormone, is only made in the terminal buds. What happens with the auxin is it's made in the terminal bud, but it has its effect all the way down the branch. The effect is on the lateral buds. When the terminal bud makes auxin, auxin will promote growth in the terminal bud while inhibiting growth in the lateral buds below it on that branch. So that last statement was important enough. I'm going to say it one more time, and then we'll see what happens when you make a cut. Auxin, the growth hormone, is made in the terminal buds, and it promotes growth in the terminal bud while at the same time inhibiting growth in all of the lateral buds beneath it on that branch. All right, so that's the vocabulary, that's the basics. Let's go to the 2 kinds of cuts. All right, the first cut, I'm going to call it a heading back cut. They've come up with new names for these things. I kind of like the old names better. Heading back, you're taking back the head, the head being the terminal bud. And it makes sense to me, heading back, taking the head of the branch off. So if you do, well, let me show you one here first, and then I'll show you the picture of it. All right. Almost any cut you make is going to take that terminal bud off. But if you go down and you find a lateral bud in a heading back cut, you are going to cut just above the lateral bud, about 1/4 inch. And you are going to do it at an angle. I'll show you with this, and then I'll show. Sure. Yes. All right. I will. I'm going to make the cut for you, and then I'll show you a picture, which might be a little bit clearer. But let's say I choose this bud right here. I'm going to go 1/4 inch above that bud, and I am going to go at a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to make a cut like that. Let's look at the picture here, see if that's clearer. All right. Here is a heading back cut. You chose this bud, 1/4 inch above, 45-degree angle. What about these? These are all incorrect. This one, you just have too much of an angle. This one, you may have cut into some of the bud that's left behind, and that bud may just die. This one, you're so far above it, this, if there are no other hidden lateral buds in here, this will just die. These are made all the time. Plants really are pretty forgiving. Most of the time, these will work, but this is the best. This is the best way. All right, now the important part. How does the plant respond to that cut? So now we'll go again with this. All right. Another safety thing, when you're not using them, close them. All right. How does the plant respond to the cut? What happens is you've just taken the terminal bud off. So this branch can't make auxin anymore. This plant is programmed by its DNA to make auxin. And so, at the risk of being anthropomorphic, this is going to scramble. This branch is going to scramble to be able to make auxin. So this lateral bud is going to grow and become the terminal bud, and it will encourage itself to grow, and it will inhibit the lateral buds below it on that branch. The advantage of this kind of cut is that the lateral bud that you chose, whatever direction it's pointing, is the direction of new growth that you will get. Maybe that is right over my sidewalk, and I don't want that. Well, why not just go down a little bit further to this one, which is pointing that way, which is not over my sidewalk. And you can just keep going down until you find one going in the direction you want. If you're not worried about a sidewalk, in general, it's best to choose a lateral bud that's not facing back into the middle of the plant. It's best to choose one that is going to spread it out and let it get a little more light and air, if you have that opportunity to make that choice. All right, so this shows you the advantage. You get to choose the direction of growth. It does reduce the size of the plant some, which you probably want. The disadvantage is that you are highly encouraging new growth in whatever lateral bud is just below the cut you just made. 4 weeks later, after you've pruned, you go back out and you look at your shrub and you go, oh my gosh, now I have to prune it again. 4 weeks after that, you're going to have to prune it again. So when you make heading back cuts, remember, you're really highly encouraging new growth, which may not really be what you want. Is there anything else we could do? Oh, yes. Cut number 2. All right. Cut number 2 is called a thinning cut. It also has another new name for it, but I'm going to use thinning because I think that describes it well. All right, so let's say, all right, here we go. Here's a nice branch right here. If we cut anywhere along the branch, it will be a heading back cut. But if we follow it all the way back to where it joins another main branch, and you make your cut right there, yes, you cut the terminal bud off. Yes, that branch can't make auxin anymore, but the whole branch isn't there anymore. So what did you do? Well, you did reduce the size of the mass of the plant. What about, okay, it's going to encourage growth in lateral buds. Well, there really aren't any lateral buds below it. You took them all off. Well, what about the lateral buds down here? Well, they're under the influence of this terminal bud up here. So what have you done to the hormone levels in this plant, the amount of plant that's left? And the answer is nothing. It does not encourage new growth. Whereas the other kind of cut highly encourages new growth. Now, I want to make a comment here about making this cut correctly. When you have a plant that's at all woody, If you look at where you're going to, well, for example, if you cut this one right here, that would be a thinning cut. If you cut it in here, it would be heading back. If you look there, or you could cut it all the way back into here, right where that branch joins the next main branch, you often see a little thickening. Sometimes you see little concentric rings, and that is called the branch collar. Sure.
We're talking about right here, the thickening of the material right along there, by dropping down here.
All right. That branch collar, it's really obvious on some trees. Others not so obvious, kind of depends on the growth habit. But why would you want to leave the branch collar on? You want to leave it on because there are specialized cells within the branch collar that are involved with healing the wound that you just made on the plant. For example, let's see, here we go. Let me put this tool down here first. All right. It happens in nature all the time. I mean, trees lose branches. Yeah, here you go. I'm not sure where to hold it. I don't know whether we made that pruning cut or nature made that pruning cut. Now, homeowners look at it and say, well, that's kind of ugly though. Well, it's not ugly to a tree. That is the natural, normal healing process that a plant has. You can go buy this stuff, pruning sealer. Don't do it. Don't waste your money. It actually hurts the plant more than it helps it. Let it go. It will heal itself just fine without your help. Unless, of course, you took the branch collar, in which case it will be a little bit more difficult to heal. All right, so those are the two kinds of cuts. I think I want to show you one thing here that has to do with these kinds of cuts. If you have a shrub or you have a hedge and you say, well, yeah, I'm gonna go do my pruning today. You know, I'm gonna get out there and prune. When you do this, you have just made possibly hundreds of indiscriminate heading back cuts. Highly encouraging new growth right below every cut that you just made. And like I said, a month later, you go out and you're going to have to do the whole thing again. When you do that, all the new growth over and over is only going to be in the outer few inches of the plant that you continually prune like this. You look down into it and it looks like it's dead. It's not dead, but it kind of looks, there's nothing green in there. And even on this one, you can see it gets that kind of black sooty mold. You get scale, which is insects, because the kind of conditions that fungus and scale like is dark and moist. And you just set that situation up when you make that kind of continuous heading back cut. However, you might be sitting there thinking, well, that's really, yeah, that's nice, Mary, but I got a 30-foot hedge and it would take me a month every day to go and find every perfect little, lateral bud and get the right cut. It would take forever. So I would suggest to you, if you are going to make some indiscriminate cuts, heading back cuts like that, how about consider going back and doing some thinning cuts? Like, maybe just take a few places like this one and take it all the way back, take the whole thing off. What will happen is you'll end up with these windows that go into the plant, giving it more light and air than it had before. I guess the other advantage, if you consider it an advantage to all those heading back cuts and getting, growth like this, is you get what we call the meatball look to the plant. But a lot of people like the meatball look. And if that's what you want, you are going to sacrifice some of the health of the plant, but it'll look like a meatball, and that may be good for you. How about giving your meatballs a few thinning cuts and make it a healthier plant? All right. So I'm looking at time here, and making sure. All right. Before I go to when you would prune, I want to let's look at this one here. Try not to get too many of these up there. Yep, whoops, there it goes. I'll get that because it'll only hold it so many. All right. If you look at these two pieces of shrubbery here, this one has some windows cut into it. It looks healthy, looks happy. This one over here, your problem with this one is, let's see if I can find here we go. The problem with this one is this. You're always better off if you can make the top of your shrub to be narrow and wider at the bottom so that it all gets sunlight than you are to have it shaped like this. The most often asked question is, but what if I have this? Can I fix it? And the answer is maybe. If you have a plant that's very forgiving, you could, but you would have to take this one, make it narrow at the top, prune all this back. Well, you'd have to take whatever this is your widest part. You'd have to come up here. It's going to be pretty ugly for a while. You're not going to have much green left on it, but it may very well work. Your other option is, let's see, here we go. If you have started with something like this, where everything's on top of one another, they're crossing, they're rubbing, it's too dense, the first thing you do is you take some thinning cuts. I'm talking to the ground. Then what's left, you do some heading back cuts on, and you're left with this, which an awful lot of it is gone. It may take a good while to recover, but I have done it to some plants, especially things like hollies, and it recovers. You just have to be a little patient with it. It might take 2 years, but it's very possible. Thinning would be first, heading back would be second, and you can get this. All right, so I would like to go, we're done with that one, I guess. I'd like to go to the next topic, and that would be, when is the best time to prune? For this one, I'm just looking at all the things I forgot. I'll get to this. All right, let's go to when would you prune? Because I know that's a topic I just want to be absolutely sure I do cover. Plants generally fall into one of two categories. We do have a problem that there are new cultivars that make it so they like to fall into both categories. But for the most part, plants fall into one of two categories. I'm giving them a name. I'm calling it the azalea category. And then I'm going to call the other one the crepe myrtle category. Let's go with the azalea category first. I have here's an example of a piece that was cut off of an azalea plant. If you look carefully, you might have to really get down there and look. The buds of the flowers are already there. It is mid-February. Now, you can see it on that one. Okay, there, the buds are already there. These are the buds that are going to bloom in April, May. You would not want to prune this right now, or you're going to lose your flowers. Would it hurt the plant to prune it now? Probably not. I think it would be all right if it were pruned now. It's just that you're going to lose your flowers. So when should you prune it? If you're worried about the flowers, you don't want to lose them, you need to prune it right after it blooms. So we are now in February. These buds were set probably over 6 months ago. They were set last summer. So you need to, after this blooms, it's February, March, April, it blooms. The blooms fall off in May. Get your pruners out before it starts new growth and sets the 2022 blooms, which will be set in the summer of 2021. All right, so these are things like azaleas, rhododendrons. There are many things in this category. Let's go to group number 2, which is crepe myrtles. There we go. All right, here is group number 1, your azaleas. They bloom on last season's growth. Prune immediately after blooming. What if it's a crepe myrtle, another very common plant around here? If we have crepe myrtles and you look at them, you will not see any blooms already set or buds already set. They're not there yet. It will start to grow. It's now February, March, April. Actually, crepe myrtles are kind of one of the last things to come out. May, June. By then, you're getting some new growth. The new growth continues, get some little flower buds, and by later in the summer, they bloom. But they're only blooming on this year's growth. So the time to prune something like a crepe myrtle is now. Don't wait until the growing season starts. Prune it now, when it's dormant. So on this season's growth are the buds. Prune it during the winter, when it's dormant. Then you have all these other things like encore azaleas. And encore azaleas have been, they're different cultivars, and they've been bred so that they bloom and then they bloom again. I would say for anything like that, when you're not sure, just prune it after it blooms, because you're certain to not lose the blooms if you do that. So some things just either they haven't read the book or we have genetically modified them so that we get more blooms. All right, so that is this one here. I'm just checking out. I wanted to point out something to you that I hadn't shown before. This might lead us into, I have a couple of pruning techniques that I think you might be interested in. This is Nandina, or also it's also called heavenly bamboo. Very common in this area. By the way, it is on the invasive list. Invasive basically means it will easily crowd out other, especially native plants, and it easily spreads. This one spreads along the ground, but also birds and animals come and get the berries and deposit them someplace else, and they may be growing places where you really didn't intend for them to grow. This is a pretty good example of what happens when your terminal bud is in charge, so to speak, and it is inhibiting, it's making itself grow. All your greens up near the top, but all this down. Are there any buds down here? Yeah, there's plenty of lateral buds down here, but they don't express themselves because they are under the influence of this bud up here. And just one other comment before I leave that. I remember when I first learned that concept, that the terminal bud promotes growth while simultaneously inhibiting growth in all the lateral buds beneath it on that branch. And then I got to thinking, that doesn't really make sense. You know, how could that be that it could be doing two opposite things at the same time in the same plant? And the explanation is beyond just a 1 hour Saturday afternoon class, but it is true. And you have to go down to, you really have to go to the cellular level, even molecular level, to be able to explain it. But even though it doesn't quite make sense to you, you can see it in nature so much, where, you know, trees that only have green at the top, they don't branch out much. And there's the perfect example. It's not a tree, but our Nandina plant. All right. So I want to just for a second, and are there any pressing questions that, no? Okay, all right.
Yes, this one was the hydrangea.
Okay, well, I can, yeah, I don't have a hydrangea one here, but I could address something with hydrangeas because it's a really neat pruning technique that you can use, not just with hydrangeas, but lots of other plants that you see around here. I did, before we move on, I did just want to mention, what if you have something that is evergreen, that's like a juniper, you know, in that kind of pine family, juniper, evergreen type thing. You have to be awfully careful. Some of them, especially the ones that you see them all over the place, they're low to the ground, they grow horizontally. Some of them are beautiful, but after years they get really woody and knotty, and you go, couldn't I just prune these way back and just let them start over again? The answer is probably not. The problem with these kinds of, this kind of plant is, if you make any pruning cuts up here where it's green, that's okay, because you have lateral buds and you will get new growth. But once you get down into where there is no green, there are also no lateral buds. So if you take this and you say, okay, I'm going to get rid of all of that, and I'm just going to, you know, cut that. And you say, well, it's kind of ugly. A year from now, it's going to be just as ugly. And a year after that, and the year after that. Yeah, it's a tough thing. Some of these, I really don't know what you do. They're not easy to dig up either. But, you know, sometimes it is time for the compost pile. You're not going to be able to fix this one, where there are some other things you can fix with some renewal pruning. All right. Hydrangea, let me go to that one and see. I think I'm going to use this. I'm looking at, okay, we're good for time. We may have time for some, if there's any questions. We could always do the 1, 2, 3 cut here, and we can get you up here for that. All right. Let's say we have a hydrangea that right now, you have to admit, they are ugly looking. I mean, there's no leaves on them. They look like they're dead, but they're not. And it's really overgrown. Here's your ground right here, right? And you have many, it's canes. We'll call them canes, like a caning habit. Lots like Forsythia has a caning habit. Nandina has a caning habit to it. Maybe you've got some, that looks pretty good. Nothing's really overlapping, kind of a nice size. And then a couple years later, you start getting, some of this. Well, doesn't look quite so pretty anymore, getting kind of a mess. Let's say you get, and I'm not going to count them, but I'm going to say that there's 21 canes here. And some of them are overlapping and rubbing and gnarly and a mess. Most, and not all, but most hydrangeas, the very common kind, we call them mop head. They're the ones that turn either pink or blue, depending on the pH level of the soil. They're beautiful plants, not at this time of year, they're not, but they are beautiful plants in the summer. What you could do with those is you say, oh, well, let's cut it back so it's not so big and falling over. You won't get any blooms if you do that with that type of hydrangea. There are different types. What you can do, if there's 21 canes, you could do thinning cuts. The only way to do a thinning cut on a cane is to take it right to the ground. You can take up to 1/3 of the canes, and you want to cut them right at the ground. So you take 7 of them. You don't have to take 7. You could just take 2 or 3 if you want. Well, how do you know which ones? You want to take the oldest. They are going to be the ones with the largest diameter. They tend to be a little lighter in color. Their outside edges, it's not smooth. Sometimes they have little pieces peeling up on them. You could take as many as 7 out of there. Now you will notice that in hydrangeas, this time of year, even if you dig back where all those leaves have caught all around, they always catch leaves, you will notice that there are some new little ones forming. All right, if you take 7 out of here and let it go, these new ones down here will begin to grow this year. But your biggest, oldest crossing ones are gone. Right? It blooms the following year. What if you took the 7 biggest, oldest ones out? Well, it doesn't mean that you're down to a few, because these have grown up. And the next year you take 7, or about 1/3 out. If you did that every year, you wouldn't have any that are more than 3 years old. And guess what you get your best flowers on? Not necessarily that first year, but second, third year, you get your best flowers. It never gets really big. You never get those big ones that go up and then they flop over, out onto your sidewalk. And you could do this with any kind of hydrangea, no matter when it blooms. I probably should go back and re-mention, it's true for this and true for many plants. What if your question is, how do I know if this plant blooms on old wood beating from the year before, from the growing season before, or it blooms on this coming growing season? How do I know? Well, if you can't, you can look it up if you know the name of the plant, but maybe you don't even know the name of the plant. The best hint is if it blooms early, especially early spring, it had to have formed on last season's growth. If it blooms later, like getting more in very late spring or into the summer, then it's probably blooming on this year's growth. And that's very true. Azaleas bloom really early. Great myrtles bloom later. So if you don't know, 'cause, oh my gosh, there's hundreds of kinds of different hydrangeas. If you don't know, ask yourself, when does it bloom? Or notice this year, when does it bloom? Very early or later? And then you're going to know when those buds were set, because you can't always tell, you can't tell by looking at them on a hydrangea. But that actually works. And let's see, I've got my here. I'm looking. Well, that doesn't want to come off very easily, does it? There we go. Give myself another little drawing here. Okay. And here's one other tip of something you can do. What if you have some, whoops, I think I got this. There we go. Is that still okay on the picture? All right. What if you had something like Nandina, that heavenly bamboo, all right, all your green is going to be up top here. And you say, well, gosh, it's kind of ugly down here. What could I do for pruning that? And my suggestion would be that you could take 1/3 of these, and I'd do it with Nandina, I'd do it right now, February. You could cut 1/3 of them. Let's see. Okay. Then another 1/3 of them about down in the middle here. And the last third down here. And let me tell you, they are going to look really ugly when you do this right now. You are going to see a bunch of sticks. But you wait until the spring and the summer. Just below the cut, these are all heading back cuts. Just below the cut that you made, here we go. All right. Just below these cuts, you can see they have the nodes happens on an Nandina. Whenever you have a node like this, a lateral bud is just below that node. If you make the cut like this, you will have these at the top, these will be here in the middle, these will be down near the ground, and you get a whole cascade of green and the red berries from top to bottom. And I mean, and it really works. It is a beautiful plant. It's just too bad it really is invasive. So we don't really encourage you to choose this plant. But there are a lot of plants that have, you know, this kind of habit to them. All right. I think we have time. We could still do a 1, 2, 3 cut, and still, if there's some, are there some questions? There are 2 questions. Well, let's do those 2 questions, and then we'll try a 1, 2, 3 cut if we have time.
So, does this pertain to vegetable plants or stuff for you?
I think the answer is that all of these kinds of cuts pertain to all kinds of plants. Unfortunately, things do have their own little growth habit, you know, to them, and each one can have a little bit of a different type of growth habit. I'm going to say that for the most part, it does apply to everything. The best thing you can do is look at your plant and look at the growth habit that it has. And that tells you a lot to start with. Now, this would not be like some of our little herbaceous, you know, vegetable plants, but a lot of times you can look at it, and if anything has ever broken off, whether you pruned it or just nature pruned it, look at how it responded. And boy, that tells you a lot about the response you are going to get from it when you prune it. But for the most part, yes, plants, they're still pretty much the same. Yes, what else is there?
Someone is asking, there are two people who have questions that are specific. One is about boxwoods, how to do their new shoots. It doesn't install new plants. There's new shoots that to trim back. And then the other one is about non-cover.
Okay. Yeah, well, boxwoods, I would say, first of all, be sure you really do have a boxwood. There's a lot of plants that kind of look like boxwoods, but they're not. If you're getting new shoots and they're growing several inches, it's probably, it's not that English boxwood. There are some different kinds. You got to be really careful with boxwoods. We've got a boxwood blight that has been spreading in the area. Once you make any kind of cut on it, you've got to clean these before you make a cut on another plant. There's a whole lot going on with boxwoods, but if you're going to do some pruning, you do it now before the growing season starts. Yes, you can prune them. You might want to consider, if it's already pretty crowded, pretty close together, you might want to consider a couple of thinning cuts on those. But the real boxwoods grow very, very slowly. The amount of pruning that you need to do on them is minimal. Yes, to maybe try to take a little more at the top. You're gonna have to be patient. If it's a true boxwood, it's gonna take a while to grow back. But yeah, take more at the top and let it spread out toward the bottom so that you get more light to it. Yes.
Mary, how would you clean? You mentioned cleaning your
Yes.
tools. What's the best way that you like?
The best way that I like to clean it is
To avoid pests?
to avoid disease.
Yeah, like with the box.
Oh, mouthwash is the best thing to use on it. I've read some articles. There might even be one on the site I gave you earlier, because I reviewed those, that says use bleach. Well, let me tell you, it will work. Bleach will kill bacteria. It will disable viruses. It will stop the spread of disease, but it's so hard on your tools that your tools are just not going to last at all. You could use, you could use some good old Listerine, and you can keep using your tools for years when you do that. But that's a good question. I kind of had left that one off, had forgotten about that one. All right, and also another cleaning, good old steel wool. You know, you can really, like this, it looks like it's not really dirty, it's just stained, it's been used so much, but this is actually a rather clean tool. And steel wool is pretty good on this one. All right, I think we have time for, all right, we have time to show one more thing before we will have to leave. Yes, I need my volunteer here for this. All right, this is what we are trying to avoid. Are you able to see that? When you are pruning something, when you make the cut, a lot of times when the branch comes down, it strips some of the bark, and you've opened up another big area for mold, pests, you know, big wound that has to heal. But you can avoid that. And so here is our suggestion to avoid it. And let's see, yes, here we go. This is our tree right here. And this is right here, our branch on the tree. And we want to prune this branch off of the tree. All right, let me get my, there we go, this. What we want to do is avoid that strip. So what you can do is make what we call a 1, 2, 3 cut. Your first cut is from underneath the branch. I would go a foot, and the exact place is not important. It can be 2, 3 feet away. It doesn't really matter, but a little bit away from our tree. You go underneath and you cut about halfway through the branch. Take your saw out, and next you're going to cut. I'm going to do it this way, okay? You're going to go about about 1 to 2 inches away from your original cut, which was from underneath, and you're going to make a cut from the top. And this cut is going to go about halfway through. And when you get about halfway through, without doing a thing, you don't have to tug, pull, nothing, this is going to fall off. And you say, oh, you made that. No, it really is that clean cut. What you've done is remove all this weight, the mass of this limb here. If you mess up, and it does strip it a little bit, it just strips it right here. You're going to cut that off anyway, so it doesn't matter. So what the third, it's a 1, 2, 3 cut, which, yes, he's got the rule. Look at that here too. Now you go here and you leave the branch collar on, and now you can make a nice clean cut. This will come off, and there you are, with your branch collar still on, of course, right, so that it can heal. Of course, there are hundreds of other topics that we could do. I have tried to, oh, here, we do have the picture. If you look at that, here's your first cut, your second cut, your third cut, branch collar is left on, perfect. But I have enjoyed spending my hour with you, and I want to thank my 2 helpers here, my 2 Master Gardener helpers, and Susan and Nate. And I hope you take advantage of our help desk, especially. I mean, you know, Master Gardeners are, we answer questions. It's what we do. You know, it's us. And we would love to help you out with any of your horticulture questions. Just call that number anytime during the week. So I guess that is it. Thank you so much for joining us.